This was the episode that I connected with the most. This was the one I thought about the most after the episode was over, the one that I still think of and have new ideas about. Hi guys, Geezer64 here, and today we're talking about The Orville New Horizons. That's right, you thought it was done, you thought it was over, you thought with my review of episode 10, the finale, I'd be done talking about Orville. Nope. Still talking about The Orville, because today we're going to be talking about each episode. I'm going to be ranking each episode. This is obviously just based on my opinion. This is my list on what I thought was the best ones, which ones I connected with the most. There's no right or wrong list. There's just people's lists of what it is that they like the most. In a lot of ways, this video actually acts as kind of a season review as well. There are spoilers in this video, so if you guys have not seen The Orville New Horizons, I will be spoiling some of the episodes in this video, so I do recommend checking it out if you haven't, though most likely if you clicked on this video, you've already seen all of Orville New Horizons. And I think most of us agree that this season of The Orville was great. And we would love a season 4. I don't think there are any bad episodes this season. There's just ones that I prefer more than others. There's ones that I enjoyed more than others. But just because it's whatever I say is ranked at the bottom of my list doesn't mean it's a bad episode. It just means that I didn't like it as much as other episodes. So with all that said, let's just go ahead and jump into it. Number 10, episode 5, A Tale of Two Topas. I know a lot of people really love this episode. I posted a poll on the channel for the first 5 episodes of the season when the first 5 episodes of the season came out, and this was voted number 1. I was actually really surprised by that, because I think that there are better episodes. Obviously, I'm ranking this at the bottom. As I said, there's no bad episodes this season. I just thought this episode was too long for the story that they were telling. This is one of the longest episodes of the season. The pacing suffered as a result of the length of the episode. I think there's a lot of sections that could have been cut out. I think it really dragged in parts. And as I said, I think that this episode could have benefited from a solid B plot. It needed another plot that was concurrent with this. And I think that would have really beefed up this episode. This is an episode I don't really see myself going back to revisit. When I go back and rewatch the series, I'll probably skip over this one. Again, I don't think it's a bad episode. It's just not something that I would really want to revisit. I think this is very much a rehash of other ideas that we've already seen from season 1 and 2.
Something very familiar about all this.
There's a lot of Mocklin episodes in the last season. I think there was like 3 Mocklin-centric episodes in season 2. So I just kind of was like worn out on the Mocklin stuff. I don't think this really covers any new ground. I thought they went overboard in the way they portrayed Clyden in this episode. They made him into like a clear villain instead of trying to actually show things from his perspective. There are some good character moments in this episode, and it's the culmination of the story that started in episode 3 of the series. So from a character perspective, this episode succeeds in kind of tying up some of those plot points. From a character perspective, I think that it works on that level. But as I said, I just think it's a rehash of things we've already seen from the Mocklins, and that's why it's at the bottom of the list for my my rankings. Number 9, episode 7, From Unknown Graves. As I said, with episode 5, it was in sore need of a B plot. This episode suffers from the opposite problem. There are like 4 plots going on with additional plot points kind of sprinkled in here or there in this episode. And unfortunately, with everything's going on, it just came across as like a hodgepodge of leftover ideas from the season just crammed into this one episode.
It's so dense. Every single image has so many things going on.
I just feel like this episode was very much scattershot of kind of half-baked, abandoned ideas that they just kind of threw in here. I wouldn't say any of the plots are inherently bad. They just seem very incomplete, unfinished. I think the plot with the Kalon builders with the family in K1 was the best of the plots. I think they really should have focused on that plot in particular. One of the other plots you got going on is Lamar and Kiali and that relationship, which they hinted at in the episodes prior. Kind of comes to a culmination here, but it's really just played for laughs. And it does kind of land on that part. I'm not going to sit here and say that I didn't think that the way that it played out wasn't funny. But I do think it was a little bit of a wasted opportunity to kind of do a little bit more than just make a joke out of it. The Isaac and Claire relationship plot works well on paper, but it didn't really connect with me on screen. I think it was really due to some dialogue choices. But I know some other people did connect with it, and that's cool if you did. I wish I did. I didn't really connect with it as so much on this. I definitely think there's other episodes where I connected more with the Isaac-Claire relationship than I did in this episode. The Themis plot, it kind of bleeds into the Kalon Builders plot. The Claire and Isaac plot also helps conclude the Charlie Burke Isaac plot that's run through the season. So there's just a lot of stuff that's really happening here. You also got the Genesi plot, which it really needed some time to flesh out. I think that easily could have been a concurrent plot that ran along with the episode 5 story and could have tied into that. I like the idea of the Genesi and exploring that culture, but what we get in this episode is just very superficial. Like I said, it's just all of these ideas feel very incomplete in this episode. Again, this isn't a bad episode. I did enjoy watching it. I just think this one was weaker than the other episodes this season. Number 8, episode 2, Shadow Realms. So the Orville takes on horror in this episode, and I think this episode takes a little bit to get going. The thing that kind of kicks it off is kind of goofy. Like, why would they board this alien spacecraft and not wear AV suits?
Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
But I did really like the creature effects here. I thought that they worked really well. I like the idea of the expanse and the fact that Krill warned them ahead of time, but they're explorers, so they're like, we're going to go see what's out there. We're not going to listen to your superstitious things. We need to see for ourselves. And I like the idea of the biomechanical ant Borg. I was hoping that they would show up again this season. They seem to imply that could potentially be. It didn't have time. Again, they fit a lot into these 10 episodes this season, but they didn't have any point where this was really referenced again or they were brought up again. I think the horror aspects of the episode work pretty well. However, I thought the ship suddenly being empty of crewmen was strange. Like, it's like the lights went out and then all of a sudden everybody just disappeared on the ship. No random crewmen really walking around. And I didn't like the ending. It was very abrupt. There wasn't a mention at the end of the crew that they lost. There were several crew that were, changed into these biomechanical ant Borg, and those crew weren't necessarily addressed at the end of the episode. I thought it was almost like there was a whole scene that was missing. And the ending was very abrupt as well. Like, it was just like, hey, you need to take all your ant Borg and leave the ship, or else we're gonna have to take everybody out with this chemical weapon that they designed. To be honest, I think there were several episodes this season that had weak endings. I think that was a running thing with several episodes, not all the episodes, but several episodes that just had weak endings. This was one of those episodes for me. I think this was one of the weakest endings. But despite some of the problems with this episode, I do think it worked pretty well. I had a lot of fun with it, and I think on the horror level, it worked pretty well. Number 7, episode 3, Mortality Paradox. I would say that this episode is like the Twilight Zone episode of the season, and I think I'm more partial to this one because I really love Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone is one of my favorite shows of all time, and so when I was watching this, I was kind of picking up a little bit of Twilight Zone vibes, so I probably liked it more than what some other people did. I like the mystery and seeing the crew in different situations. The plane crash, the whole plane setup, I think, was a solid callback to Twilight Zone's Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. So that was really awesome. I think it captured some of the humor that people were missing. The criticisms for the first couple episodes, because this was episode 3, the first couple episodes was that there wasn't any humor. Where'd all the humor go in the show? It was all sucked out. I think this episode had some of that humor people were probably looking for. I did think it fell apart a little bit at the end because I figured out the twist almost immediately. The Kalon bait and switch wasn't as interesting as the earlier parts of the episode, like the school and the cave troll and the plane crashes and stuff like that. And again, I didn't like the ending of this episode. I like the return of the alien culture from season 1 of the show. I like them coming back. I just think the ending was not good. You have this sanctimonious alien just sitting there explaining everything that happened through exposition and sounding very pompous. And the crew just kind of sit there and just nod their heads really to it. They don't really call her out for it or anything like that. So I would have liked it better if the alien was told off more by Captain Mercer and the crew about the morality of what they did, because it's clear the alien race's like moral code has suffered as a result from their immortality. And I think it would have been a more solid ending if you actually had both parties learning something from each other instead of this sanctimonious alien just playing games with them essentially and just being pompous. I really didn't like the ending. I'm also more partial to this episode than I think some other people because it does its own thing. We only have a few episodes where the Orville kind of like explores and it pushes and does its own like self-contained stories, contained adventures. I think that this actually does that. It doesn't require any knowledge of the Orville universe in order to enjoy this episode at all. The ending's really what knocked it down for me. This was one of my favorite episodes earlier on, but as more episodes came out and I reflected more on the ending, it just the ending really is what pushed this one towards the bottom of my list than where it started at the top of my list. But I did like the ride that this episode took me on, so I enjoyed it. Number 6, episode 8, Midnight Blue. I could have easily flipped this in my rankings with the last episode of Mortality Paradox. Mortality Paradox had a weak ending. Midnight Blue had a weak start. Generally, you can have a weak start as long as the ending's solid. So Midnight Blue takes the edge in my rankings here. There's a lot of things I really like about this episode. Dolly Parton appearing was awesome. A really nice surprise. I really like that scene. Bortus and Grayson worked together in this episode. I thought all that worked well. Bortus going full like dad mode and just like wrecking that Mocklin Leatherface guy. And the scene where Bortus appears before the Union Council with Topa, I think that's one of the best scenes of the entire season. This season, I feel like I was just kind of burnt out on the Mocklins. The main reason why this one isn't taking a higher spot. We've seen a lot of the Mocklins. We got lots of Mocklin episodes last season in particular, and most of the interesting ideas have already been explored, as I said, with the episode 5. I like seeing the female Mocklin colony again. However, the setup to kick off this episode, I had a problem with. It feels forced, very, very slow before the episode kind of gets going. But also, there's just some real logic problems here. I don't understand, why does Havina decide to risk her colony to break the treaty? That's not really explained. That seems like poor leadership decisions, and I like Havina, so it's like, well, why is she portrayed this way? Was this a choice that the colony voted on, or did she just decide to do this on her own? We don't really see that. It's not really explained. Like I said, I like Havina, and this episode just doesn't do a good job of making us understand why she made that decision. Why did she rope Topa in? Why is she risking the entire colony to start smuggling again and breaking the treaty? Why did the Mocklins take Topa in the first place? That just seemed like a really stupid decision that they don't actually explain. Like, it's one of those things where they're just writing the Mocklins just to be these evil guys, just to be, mustache twirling villains. And I just think it removed a lot of nuance that the Mocklins had before this. What made the Mocklins think Topa even knew anything in the first place? And even if she did know something, why would they risk grabbing somebody from a Union vessel? Like, that seems kind of crazy. And better question, why didn't they just, if they knew something was going on, why didn't they just try and catch Havina breaking the treaty? Or are planning to break the treaty, and then go to the Union. On paper, they would have been in the right, and the Union would have backed them, and the Mocklin female colony would have been in a really bad position. I just think the setup needed some work. I think with a better setup, this episode probably would have made it into my top 5 for sure. I had some logic problems that I really couldn't get over early on in the episode, and it just took a while to get going. Number 5, episode 1, Electric Sheep. This episode did a great job of setting the tone for the season, and there are some fans who missed the humor from the first season, as I mentioned before. This kind of set the tone and was like, hey, this season is going to be a little bit more serious than previous seasons. We're leaning heavier into the sci-fi. I like the tone this season. I think this season is the best season in my opinion. I think New Horizons is the best out of the 3 seasons of the Orville, although I like the other seasons as well. This episode lays great groundwork for some plots that play out throughout the entire season as well, with Isaac and Claire's relationship, with the introduction of Charlie Burke in this episode, and her animosity towards Isaac obviously plays a part in this episode, and that carries through the rest of the season. They also address the Kalon threat and the ramifications of some of the things that happened in the last season. We get a cool space battle with the Kalon. It's our first shot of really the upgraded production and the effects for these space battles with the Kalon. The topic in this episode was pretty heavy, dealing with Isaac shutting himself down, and I thought it was handled very well. Again, it's all what stories you individually connect with. This was one that I connected with. It gave us one of the best scenes with of the entire season, or the entire show, with Claire breaking down in the simulator. No music or anything, just pure emotion with a fixed camera. One of the best shots of the season. The Pterodon, the fighter, is introduced in this episode. And every episode after this, I was like, when's the Pterodon coming into play? You set up this Pterodon. Where's the Pterodon? It doesn't come into play until episode 9, unfortunately. But they do set it up here in this episode. We even get some love for the late, great Norm Macdonald, who voiced Yaphet. Norm Macdonald is one of the best comedians of my lifetime. I kind of wish that they were able to use more Norm Macdonald's voice and use Yaphet a little bit more in this season. This episode may not be as flashy as some of the other ones, but I think it was really solid, and it's hitting like right in the middle of my list with number 5 slot. Number 4, episode 4, Gently Falling Rain. The Krill return in the best way possible. This is my favorite episode featuring the Krill. I like the Krill. There are 2 main alien species that they focus on in the Orville. You got the Mocklins and the Krill. I find the Krill more interesting, despite the fact that the Mocklins have had probably like double the amount of episodes, double the amount of screen time. Or maybe it's because the Mocklins have been overused, the reason why I prefer the Krill. I don't really know. But whatever the case is, I thought this episode was really good. This episode also had one of my favorite scenes from the entire season, which was the Krill ambassador describing why Annie, the play Annie, is so haunting. I mean, I'll remember that. That was a great scene. That was one of my favorite scenes, and one of the funniest scenes of the entire season.
In our culture, the sun is a symbol of suffering and death.
We finally see the Krill planet in this episode, and it looks really awesome, really cool. I would have liked to spend a little bit more time there than what we did. Talea returns as a new threat to the potential Krill alliance that's kind of been hinted at and been set up until this point. And the fact that Talea returns, I think that works really well. We get the introduction of Anaya, which is Talea and Ed's daughter. She was kind of old, though. I thought that was kind of weird. Why is it all the alien species, like, they all age really fast? Like, Topa with the Mocklins, all of them age really fast. It's almost like it's demanded for the plot. But regardless, it was fine. I did like the idea of it, although it's something that I called. Like, I figured that would be something that would come into play at some point later on. There's a cool speeder chase through the city. We also get one of the first big space battles of the season here in this episode as well. All of the scenes with Talea and Mercer, I think, work really well. Like, they do play off each other really well. They do seem to have some on-screen chemistry, so that obviously helps. This is also the first episode we get like a real movie feel, like, to showcase the upgraded production value. Like, this was the first episode I watched, and I was like, wow, that kind of felt like a movie. Like, this is really solid writing and really good effects for a television show, especially. I really like this episode. There's a couple like nitpicks I have with it, but nothing too big. Like, when I think back to this episode, I mainly just focus on all the things I really like, as opposed to any kind of logical problems or whatever. Because which is a testament to the episode. Obviously, I really enjoyed it. It's really good. Number 3, episode 10, Future Unknown. I don't know if people would put this as high on the list as me, but I think what this episode does that some of the greatest shows have failed to do is give us a really solid ending. I mean, think about all the terrible endings for some of the great shows like Game of Thrones, terrible ending. Dexter, terrible ending. Star Trek Enterprise, I know that one's not as a mainstream as Dexter and Game of Thrones, but for Star Trek fans, yeah, Star Trek Enterprise, that finale episode was easily the worst Star Trek finale, episodes we've ever seen. It was a terrible, finale. So if this season turns out to be the last one, the final episode here with Future Unknown is one of the best TV show finales that I've seen. It isn't bombastic. It doesn't have a bunch of, thrills. It doesn't have, it's not a clip episode or from previous episodes. It doesn't change the characters around to serve some kind of contrived plot. It doesn't time jump into the future. It doesn't throw everything in the kitchen sink just because it's the last episode. It doesn't kill off anybody. It didn't turn the show into like a dream or a simulation or something. It didn't do anything insane. It just took us through a mostly normal day on the ship with the characters we like. We got a wedding between two characters. We got the return of a side character from an episode in season 1. We got the return of a main character with Laura, who I like Laura. I think she's a great character. Anytime they can have Laura show up and write a story where she's involved, I'm down for it. You notice the theme here, though. The episode is character focused, as a good finale should be. There's almost nothing I would change here. There are some things I would have liked to see added, I guess, like maybe a tie back into Malloy's family and the time paradox from episode 6. But then again, if that was added, it would have changed the entire tone and flow of the episode. So I get why it wasn't added. It's just more like a thing that I wish was addressed and was more of a centerpiece for this episode than what it turned out to be. But again, I think it works well without that. We like the characters. This was a perfect send-off for the season, and I feel like this will be underrated on some people's lists. When you're putting together rankings, I feel like this one will probably be underrated just because it's not as in your face as the other episodes. But as I said, if this was the last episode of the series, I couldn't think of anything better, especially if you are comparing it to other shows that have faltered in their finales. This was a great season and series cap, if that's what actually happens. But Hashbrown, season 4.
Put one of those hash browns at the end and then send it to the internet.
But now we're on to the top 2. These were my clear top 2 of the season. So let's go ahead and get into number 2. Number 2, episode 9, Domino. This was certainly the most epic episode of the series. The scope was immense for this episode. The effects were some of the best I've ever seen for a television show. In a lot of ways, this episode was the actual finale of the season. Episode 10, more with Future Unknown, that basically served as kind of like an epilogue. This is a culmination of all the big choices and political decisions made through this season, and things that happened in previous seasons also kind of culminate in this episode here. The Union started the season with the Mocklins as part of the Union. The Krill, a tentative alliance with the Krill having been formed. So at this point, we're like, all right, well, it's the biologicals versus the Kalon. The Krill Chancellor even comes to Earth, but the Krill alliance ends up falling apart when Talia takes power, and the Mocklins are kicked out for kidnapping, which again, I had a logical problem with that whole idea because they don't really explain why they would do that. Like the risk reward made no sense at all. But regardless, the Mocklins are not in the Union anymore. The Mocklins are now teaming up with the Krill in this episode. The Union finds itself short of allies and in a terrible position if the Kalon attack again. One critique I have about this episode, and the main critique for this episode, and I talked about this in my review, is this device that can wipe out the Kalon just really comes out of nowhere. It's at the beginning of this episode, and they activate it, and it wipes out the Kalon. It's basically it really feels like it's just a plot device in order to play out the episode. Obviously, the Union would be working on a device like this in order to combat the Kalon. That obviously makes sense. But I don't know why they didn't actually hint at some ideas or something with this device, considering Isaac and Charlie are the ones who worked together to make this device. Nowhere in previous episodes do they really talk about any kind of breakthrough or anything in order to create this. So when the episode kicks off with them using the device, it really just comes out of left field. But as I said, that's really the only critique I have about this episode. I think this has one of the best space battles I've seen on TV since the battle for Cardassia in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. That I don't know if anything can top that space battle, but this one came very, very close. It's probably maybe right on par with it. It's really solid. The episode also brings a conclusion to the Charlie Burke story arc as she sacrifices herself, and it really strengthens her story through the entire season. The idea of them actually going all the way and having her sacrifice herself in this episode strengthens her character and her plot points and things that play out through the entire season. So I think that was a great decision. There's great character moments at Grayson's cabin with all the crew and the characters we like. And the moral questions on how they're going to use this device against the Kalon are also very interesting. This isn't the ending we would have guessed starting off the season, I don't think, but it's really amazing. I really like this episode. Number 1, episode 6, Twice in a Lifetime. This is my favorite episode of the season. This takes the number 1 spot. This isn't as big an episode as episode 9 was, but it's a very well-written story about time travel, and it's extremely character-focused. I'm a sucker for time travel stories. There are a lot of ways you can write time travel stories and mess them up. In this episode, they throw out like vague rules for how time travel works in regards to paradoxes and divergent timelines earlier in the episode, but then later in the episode, they kind of admit that they're not really sure exactly how time travel works. So it's like it leaves the speculation open for the audience as far as what's actually happening or what could happen. But it also does give emotional weight to the character conflict that we're getting in the episode. I mean, the idea of being thrown back in time and spending years alone in the woods so you wouldn't mess up the timeline, hunting animals and living by yourself out in a cabin for years on end, not having any human contact, eventually somebody's going to probably break on that. They're going to give up. And, and having him give up and then go to this woman who he fell in love with in a simulated, extrapolated version of this woman who died 400 years prior, who is alive in the same time period in which he appeared. Like, I don't think I've ever heard that story play out before. So this was a really good time travel story. Scott Grimes as Gordon Malloy really shines in this episode. He carries this episode. He makes this episode land emotionally. And the way that he portrays this version of Malloy as a father sits in stark contrast to the laid-back comedic nature that his character, usually portrays. I prefer his character here, actually. Him as a dad with a family, fiercely defending them. It really evolves that character and the idea of where that character could go. I do kind of wish this was the version of Malloy that was on the ship going forward, because there's a point where he's willing to go back to the ship, but only if he can take his family with him. And I think that if that was a decision that was made, that could really set up some potential for some things later in the following episodes. But they don't end up going that way. But I do think that the ending that they went with in the episode did pack an emotional punch. I mean, I've seen some people argue, and I definitely agree with this, that Mercer came across as pretty cold-hearted in this episode, and the way that he approached this. He didn't really try and understand or identify with Gordon's position at all. And he's approaching it from like a stark like military approach to, hey, this is the first time the Union's dealt with time travel. So again, what works on paper doesn't always work in practicality. There's a saying in the military that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And that's kind of one of these situations here. What works well on paper, what you think is a good plan, is not necessarily practical in use, and you need to be able to adapt with that as a leader. And I think he kind of faltered here in the way that he approached it. But then again, You could obviously argue the opposite position as well. And that's what makes this episode so good, is there's so many different positions you could take on this. You can understand where people are coming from. There's a lot of questions you can have discussions on time travel and how it's actually functioning here. I saw lots of really interesting comments on my video, and obviously I had some interesting thoughts in my review that I hadn't seen, although I don't watch reviews before I do my review, but my takeaways from the episode. So and since then I've thought even more about it. I think this was an episode that makes you think even well after it's over. It makes you care, has an emotional punch to it. This was the episode that I connected with the most. This was the one I thought about the most after the episode was over. The one that I still think of and have new ideas about. The one I've seen the most interesting discussions about as well. This episode shows what good, well-written sci-fi can be when you push character and heart to the forefront. It just makes it easily identifiable with anybody. You're like, well, if I was in Malloy's shoes, what would I do? What would happen? What decision would I make? And I just love this episode. Definitely my number one of the entire season. And that's it, guys. That is my list. Everyone is going to have their own list, and I think that's awesome. I really like to see other people's lists. As I said, I put up a couple polls, and some things I was surprised about, some things I wasn't as surprised about. There's no right or wrong answers to these rankings. As I said, there's no bad episodes this season. It's just a matter of what episodes you connected with, what your preferences are. I'm sure that there's some that I maybe put in the middle of the pack or towards the top of my list that maybe are at the bottom of your list, and that's cool. Everybody's got their own opinions and things on it. So, but regardless, I'm very interested to see what you guys think. So definitely share your list below. And regardless of what you think of my rankings, I think we would all agree that this season of The Orville was really solid. This was a good season of Orville. This was a good season of science fiction, and I'd love to see a season 4. I think that would be great. If you're interested in me doing a ranking video on the season 1 and season 2 episodes, let me know. I was thinking about it. I already do have some Orville videos slated on the docket, so there's definitely some more Orville videos coming. I want to shine a light on the show for at least the next few months. As it's moved over to Disney Plus, more people are coming onto it. I want to shine a light on the Orville until we get a renewal announcement, because I really do think this deserves a season 4. Although I will say that if it does not get a season 4, at least the finale, Future Unknown, was a great finale. I think that was a very solid finale, and I think right now it's underrated in comparison to some other episodes because it's not as flashy, but I think it's a solid conclusion to this show if it turns out to be. But we're still holding out hope. Hashbrown season 4 of The Orville. I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank subscribers. If you're a new subscriber from the Orville stuff, thank you. I really enjoyed reviewing this season. It was a lot of fun. Just thank you to everybody who's checked out my videos. Thank you for checking out this video. Thank you, subscribers. All of you are awesome. And if you like this video, please like, comment, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, or don't. I'm not a beggar. I'm Geek264, and I'll always tell you the truth.